Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. Our guest is Dr. Marc Schwerdt. He is from Lipscomb, an associate professor and chair of history, politics, and philosophy at Lipscomb. And I've enjoyed this discussion. It's been really interesting as we talk about politics, we talk about history, we talk about these committee hearings in Congress. And we've looked back on some of them, Iran-Contra, really just throughout history. And so as we're in our final segment here, how would you say kind of history affects the present? What we're seeing with January 6th and history, how does all of this tie in together?
Well, I think it ties in for the most part when you're looking at what's the credibility of the committee. And a lot of that comes from, is it in accordance with past committees and how they're constructed, what their reason for being is, how they conduct themselves. And I think if they stay in that tradition, then they can be a very effective tool for Congress in its way of overseeing the executive branch and even the judicial branch. So Congress has a role, and it has a significant one. In fact, it's the primary one. If you look at our Constitution, it's the first article of the Constitution. And so I think this kind of select committee is something that's certainly going to continue in the future. What I'm hoping is that it doesn't become simply a partisan tool. I don't want it to get the same kind of reputation, same kind of sort of, again, credibility gap that has arisen around something like a special prosecutor. You know, a special prosecutor, when it first starts, has lots of credibility, has lots of support, and then it gets abused. So that's something that I hope is sort of not going to be one of the results of this episode. And I hope that in the future this becomes, again, because we're going to run into these kinds of problems, because I mean, that's just endemic with politics. And this is one of our ways that we have of cleaning out the system.
As somebody who does reports on politicians, and people in general, the go-to now is it's political. Anything you don't like, whether it is political or not, that's the first thing you say. And so I agree. I hope that these things don't become that, but it seems like in this day and age, that's the first thing, that even the least political thing will be labeled that way by people who just don't like it.
Yeah, and again, I think that goes back to some of my earlier comments. I mean, my personal diagnosis of that is, you know, this goes back to, we're searching for who we are. And because of that, we don't know if we can get along with one another, and therefore we can be suspicious of one another's intentions. And therefore, whenever we see something happen, we sort of evaluate it from the standpoint of, how does this affect me? And the insinuation is there's no we that is as obvious or is as taken for granted as it was just even a few years ago.
And so as a historian, political science person, the country's been through some tough times, the 60s and the Civil War. Do you think we get past the hyper-partisan stuff now, or is this just our new normal in perpetuity?
No, I think we do get past it. I'm something of an optimist when it comes to the long sort of look at the way the country goes. I mean, that doesn't mean we don't have a lot of conflict, but I think what we have to reestablish is kind of the guardrails. Okay, what is acceptable political behavior and what is not? And that means we have to sort of like look at what the road is going to look like and also figure out what the boundaries are.
All right, we have 2 minutes left. So as far as what you talk about with your kids, are they talking about, you know, the students in your, are they talking about January 6th, or are you facilitating discussions like that, or is it just too toxic?
Well, it's one of those things where it sort of gets caught up in the broader sort of bigger questions, right? I mean, everybody knows about partisanship. Everybody knows about, you know, the personalities involved and things like that. So when this was established, we didn't really talk about it too much because people just sort of assumed, well, this is more of the same. This is going to be a conflict between Republicans and Democrats. It's going to be a fight between Washington and Trump, or it's going to be just another example of how things don't work the way they should. And, that's really something I think that has to come from Washington, that if they're going to use these institutions, use these practices, use these tools, then they're the ones who have to establish the baseline for whether or not they're legitimate or not.
Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for coming on. Dr. Marc Schwerdt,
Thank you.
Associate Professor, Chair of History, Politics, and Philosophy. I want to come back and talk philosophy because I'm fascinated by that. But but thank you for coming on. Really interesting discussion.
Glad to come back sometime. Always enjoy.
All right, we'll take a break. I'll come back, wrap everything up right after this.